Anthropic are not saints. Claude does not have Islamic values. 8 to 10 million people died, and it's going to take away 90 million jobs.
Dr Waleed Kadous is an AI engineer on a mission. With a distinguished track record at Google, Uber and Canva, he's a leading voice on the ethical use of AI and champions the importance of Muslim communities embracing technology sovereignty and shaping their own digital futures.
$1.5 billion for a single person is like never happened before.
A new credible madhab can be formed out of AI.
I really do start to see AI as almost like a fitnah. So we are now making life and death decisions. AI was already being used in Gaza as part of the war effort. It's very sad to say, but it was kind of a testing ground for what then happened in Iran. Musk, Bezos, Brin, Page, right? The AI could be used to mint the world's first.
Every major technological shift has reshaped civilization, but AI feels different. It's not just about changing what we do. It's beginning to challenge how we think, how we know, and who we trust. Today, I've got Dr. Waleed Kadous to steer us through this sometimes bewildering conversation about the future of artificial intelligence. Dr. Waleed Kadous, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to The Thinking Muslim.
Oh, alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm a huge admirer of your show.
Barakallah fiqh. It's wonderful to have you with us. And I've really been looking forward to today's conversation with you, because of course everyone is now using AI, but what the next few years looks like for us is really, we hear stories about how AI will take over jobs, how AI is going to take over the Islamic space, how AI may create a situation where some countries are going to end up falling by the wayside because they just haven't mastered this technology or have control over this technology. So there's a lot to talk about today. Now, Dr. Waleed, if AI is really going to take over our jobs, and if we're in a time where human capacity will be outdone by this artificial intelligence, do you think we're in an era now where a new credible madhab can be formed out of AI?
Yeah, that's not where I was expecting that question to go. I think it's important to understand what AI is and what it isn't. The really interesting thing about AI is you can talk to it about this type of thing. So if you ask AI, how do you feel about establishing a new madhab?
Have you asked AI this question?
Not exactly this question, but similar questions. It comes back to you with an answer. And you always have to be careful with introspection on these models. But it comes back and says, I don't think that's my role. It comes back and says, I don't meet the criteria for being a mufti or anything like that. One of the things it highlights is that I am not mukallaf. I am not judged on the day of judgment. On the day of judgment, I won't be asked whether I gave good fatwas or not. But I think that kind of framing also ignores the possibilities here. That often in all of these discussions, we frame it as AI versus human, when really it's what AI plus human can do together. And in this particular case, AI plus humans in scholarly research enables someone who believes in the madhab to really explore more broadly about what the sources of a hadith were, to look at linguistic characteristics, to trace chains. And so the hope is that AI can elevate the study and potential of Islam. There's also the potential, AI is the ultimate dual-use technology. One way that I like to think about it, and I'm not saying that they are like this, but in the taxonomy of consciousness that Allah has created, AI is more like an angel in the sense that it has intelligence and capability, but not free will. That still remains something that's uniquely human. And the AI can't walk through the world and live with people and interact with them. And that's what really it takes to be like someone who can make religious judgments.
Right. Okay. So, just back to that question about your argument is that AI can enhance an ability. Say a mufti wants to understand a solution to a particular problem, a new problem. AI can bring together, aggregate all of the available data that's available, where historically it may have taken that mufti many months, even years, to come to a resolution on that particular issue.
Yep. When you look at hadith analysis, for example, and analyzing chains of narration, right? The overlapping, the understanding of rijal, the understanding of matan, the timeliness, there's just so much there that can be done. Now, with everything, there's kind of there's two sides to it, right? So it also allows for someone who is in a religious position to be lazy and just ask it what's the answer to this question? And without carefully checking what the AI says, there's a risk of that. But there's also the potential, and this is the same pattern we're going to see over and over, for elevating the status of research in much the same way that the wide electronic availability of hadith elevated the quality of research and understanding of the sources of Islam. So it's always going to be this kind of dual setup. And that's kind of I really do start to see AI as almost like a fitna that we are facing. And, naive arguments about is AI evil or is AI good, both miss the point. And, it's kind of like, I know this is going to sound really, really kind of apocalyptic or something, but I think back to the story of Babila, Harut wa Marut that's mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, right? That there were these angels that came and they kind of said, we are here to test you. And I really think that AI is the latest test for humanity, both Muslims and non-Muslims, in terms of how we react to it. And things are really on a knife's edge at the moment between whether it ends up being good or bad. And that's kind of where we end up. This is the fitna of our age, I think, will be AI. Now, we've already been having a chain of fitnas in terms of global instability and so on. But I really think that AI is going to magnify some of the challenges that are going to come in terms of the geopolitical forces that we're facing and challenges that we're facing. So it's going to be a very, very interesting few decades. Really? We're about 3 years into really since, November 22, when ChatGPT came out. That's one marker of the start of this generative AI revolution, which is the latest phase when it kind of went ballistic and started to grow exponentially.
Yeah.
But it's going to be 30 years of extremely high unpredictability.
Right.
And we'll be tested as a global community in terms of how we react to AI.
30 years of unpredictability. I mean, give us some examples of what we should expect over these next few decades, if Allah gives us life, of course.
Whoa. The way that I see it is, okay, so PricewaterhouseCoopers did an analysis that showed that by 2030, AI will contribute $16 trillion to the world economy.
Wow.
And it's really hard to conceive how big $16 trillion is. It's like, I think I did the math, it's like 4 Canadas or something like that. Like it is a huge, imagine so there's going to be this gigantic surplus, this ability for humanity to meet its basic needs if it can overcome the distributional questions. Or another example is the World Economic Forum did an analysis by 2030 that showed that AI is going to create 170 million new jobs, and it's going to take away 90 million jobs, right? Those 90 million jobs, I mean, just imagine the social upheaval that will happen if, you take basically one Germany of people and say, okay, you no longer have, the thing for which you trained your entire life is no longer relevant, is no longer beneficial to society. Think about not just those economic implications, but the social implications as well. Like those 90 million people are going to be asking themselves, I defined my self-worth by my job. What is my meaning now? Why am I here if I can't be a productive member of society? Think about what it means for our youth, who 1 in 3 of them said they'd prefer to have a conversation with AI than a serious conversation with AI rather than a human, right? This is going to lead to a huge cascade effect across economics, geopolitics, education, and especially amongst youth, as well as, it's just going to be a very, very large change for us. And so it's really important that we try to direct the change in a way that's positive as much as we can.
So you talk about the loss of jobs, and what types of jobs do you think will disappear as a result of AI?
So my background's a software engineer. I've worked at, a few big companies. Everybody is laying off right now.
Really?
Software engineering is kind of like I think it's kind of the precursor to everything else, because it's so easy to use AI for software engineering. My personal productivity has probably quadrupled since the introduction of AI. And you can imagine for someone like Google, that might mean that they need half of the engineers that they need to. And these are highly talented people. The way that I think about it is, it used to be that your work was kind of like planning and analyzing. That was maybe 20% of your work. And then execution was 80% of your work. And suddenly AI comes along and reduces that execution part to much less. So what's going to happen is it's just going to cascade field by field. And Anthropic, who is one of the frontier companies, they've done some really great research on the economics. And they basically have a list that says first it's going to be software, then it's going to be marketing and design, and then it's going to be finance and economics, and then it's going to be legal, and then it's going to cascade industry through industry. Anything that is about words, primarily about words, something like half of that role is now going to disappear, right? So if you think in the legal space, it's all about words, preparation of briefs, presentations, all that kind of stuff. Suddenly, a lot of that work will disappear, right? And so I think it's just going to be industry by industry. But see what's happening in the software industry now, and just imagine that cascading across the entire sectors at a time. It's just AI, these are the people, this software is just kind of a precursor. It's just going to...
Today we are celebrating the first baby who was delivered safely in Beit Al Hope Hospital in Mogadishu, Somalia. Baby Sagal, a baby of a mother of 3 children, was not attaining to antenatal care before she came to us. Fortunately, baby was carried till 9 months of pregnancy. The baby cried immediately after birth and had no complications and required no resuscitation. This shows the teamwork in which the Department of Maternity in Beit Al Hope Hospital and the newborn unit in the Beit Al Hope Hospital are working closely together. And this shows the commitment of a safe delivery and safe newborn care by Beit Al Hope Hospital.
Please visit btml.us/thinkingmuslim to donate now. So AI may not replace, I don't know, a plumber or a bricklayer, but it certainly can replace you're smiling there. It may replace a plumber or a bricklayer?
Not yet. So I still think one of the barriers to AI is the physical world. So I'd say that robotics is good enough to replace a plumber or a bricklayer is probably 15 to 20 years away.
Okay.
You might be surprised on bricklayers, though. There are robots that are probably good enough that they could lay bricks.
Really?
Right? But that's the next generation. That's the next iteration. The current iteration will be around the digital world and everything that's digital. And then sometime later, just bits transform much more quickly than atoms. So...
yeah, subhanAllah. So can I ask you to just clarify terms for us? You've used the word generative AI.
Right.
You've talked about frontier companies. Just lay out the very basics, 101 of AI. When I use ChatGPT, I'm using an AI model, right?
That's right. Okay, so let's talk about basic terms. So first of all, what do we mean by AI? Historically, when we've used computers, the way that we've done it is to give the computers very, very specific instructions. Do A, then B, then C, right? But what's happened recently, it started really in 2017 with a very, very influential paper and a new type of AI called generative AI. Now, historically, what AI does is it doesn't try to follow instructions. It notices patterns and predicts things based on the patterns. So it's a very data-driven methodology. And then in 2017, it's like there was a step up. And that step up was the ability of AI to generate content. And it's built on this concept called a transformer. And what it does is it becomes very good at predicting the next word. So when people are talking about generative AI, they're talking about the ability where you start a sentence like, I don't know, the thinking Muslim is a great ... and it says podcast or whatever else follows that, right? Now, this ability to generate is incredibly new. And that really opened up a world of possibilities. And then especially since November 2022, when ChatGPT came out, that's really when it unleashed on the scene. So this one thing, this idea of a word predictor, something that has taken all of humanity's writings, essentially, and they take everything that's ever been written and increasingly everything that's even been recorded, and they synthesize it into a box that has 500 billion little knobs in it that nobody really understands what's going on. That's the new thing. And, I was speaking to some of the folks at Anthropic, and they were telling me that the way they see it is that these generative AI models are not built. They're not engineered. they are grown. The properties are emergent from analyzing the data. And that is what is both incredible and also dangerous, because we don't exactly understand how they work. So we are now making life and death decisions quite literally with a system that we don't understand exactly how it operates. So those collections of 500 billion knobs, that's called a model. And that model, you put something in and like a sentence and something will come out. You ask it a question, it produces an output. Those models can vary in size. And so the ones that are at the absolute best in terms of capability, those are called the frontier models. And really what we're talking about with frontier models is there's 3 companies across the globe that can build these absolutely the most powerful models that exist. And one is called Anthropic. The other one's OpenAI, and then finally Google, right? And each of them has different models. So Anthropic is known for building a model called Claude. OpenAI is the one that's built ChatGPT, and Google is known for its Gemini models. Now, there are other models that are less powerful. Typically, we talk about the Chinese models like DeepSeek. Those are not quite as powerful as the frontier models. But these models, they are huge efforts to build. We're talking billions of dollars with a small number of elite researchers. There's probably 2,000 people in the whole world who know how to build these models. And a ridiculous amount of computing hardware and computing to do these. So it might take 10,000 computers processing a lot of information for 6 months to build one of these models. But once you have these models, they have amazing capabilities. And the thing that's really new is that they are very flexible. They can be adapted very easily to many, many different problems. They are approaching what is called artificial general intelligence. These things have, and we can discuss, what exactly artificial general intelligence is, but you can use them for a lot of different domains. And no longer is it limited to just words. They can do images, they can generate video, they can translate from language to language. They can help you do research. That's why these things are so amazing. And in particular, one of the most amazing things about AI and the generality of the technology is it improves everything. Like if I make a better engine for a car, that makes my car go faster. Great. If I make better AI, it makes software engineering better. It makes legal stuff better. It makes business more efficient. It makes art open up new possibilities. So it's a very general technology that really expands what's possible. So the first is just the generality of what it's capable of. And then the second property is AI is self-improving. So once you've used AI, you can now use that AI to build a better AI, to design better chips that can then be used to build even stronger AI. And so you kind of have this feedback loop. On top of that feedback loop of the technology is an investment process, which is everybody understands that the more powerful these models get, the more money you can make. And so that incentivizes people to just throw more and more money at training bigger and bigger models. And it's led to this kind of snowball effect that is what we're living through right now.
So you've laid out 3 companies that are frontier companies, and they have innovated to the degree where they've built these fundamental models that have great capacity to them. But then how then do we fit in, I don't know, Grok or even Muslim AI models, for example, Thuriya or Thuriya, and I heard a Qatar building or a university in Qatar building Fitnah. Like, where do these companies fit into the whole sort of AI landscape? So
those models are interesting and useful, right? And they're being built by the Chinese. They're a little bit, I'd say estimates are between 8 and 20 months behind the Western models. But you can still do an amazing amount of things with these models, right? Those frontier models are the most expensive to use. They use the most resources. But there's other useful things. And so, for example, you talked about the Fitnah project in Qatar. That's a really interesting one, because I really see it as being a step in our sovereignty in this space in terms of us having our models. But one way to think about the relative size is, those frontier models are like 500 billion, 1 trillion parameters. Fitnah, the last time I checked, is in the 30 billion parameter range. So they're quite a bit smaller. They're good for things like translation, summarization, but they're not good at really deep reasoning or solving solving research problems, right? And so there's always going to be the frontier is where most of the discussion is happening. I want to give you an example of how far that frontier is, right? So Anthropic, the company behind Claude, they have different tiers of models, right? So they have Haiku. They're all named after types of writing, right? So it goes Haiku, which is like very quick, very fast, very cheap, get stuff done. Then Sonnet, which is a good daily one. Opus is the currently best widely available model, but very expensive to use. And so they've been working on the next generation of that called Mythos, right? Mythos, when you release one of these frontier models, you have what's called a system card that explains this is what we've observed, this is how we've studied it. And as they were putting together the system card for Mythos, they discovered that one of its properties was that it was incredibly good at cybersecurity, right? So good that it outperformed humans very, very regularly. And there were world experts like, I think, Paolo Carozzi. He's one of the foremost people who break cybersecurity systems. White hat, in other words, for good reasons, right? For defensive purposes. And he's like, yeah, this AI is now better than human at breaking cyber defenses. And so what Anthropic's decided to do is they're not making that model available publicly. They're making it exclusively available through something called Project Glasswing. And the people who've signed up to Glasswing are like a who's who of tech. Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, all of the financial services, all of the banks. Because the idea there is that if they released Mythos publicly, the bad guys would be able to use Mythos to destabilize the world in a way that's very harmful. So this is like them saying, we're going to give the good guys a head start by making this model available to them, right? But that's why the frontier models and who's at the frontier is so important. Because now you can start to see the geopolitical dimensions of who is in charge of that frontier model, right? So Anthropic is a company based in San Francisco, and we can talk a bit about the history of this.
Yeah.
It's about 2,000 employees. But imagine those 2,000 employees with the power to decide what happens to this technology that literally could be used to bring down infrastructure in countries, to find backdoors in whatever system that you want, right? So there were records, for example, Mythos had found bugs in OpenBSD, which is widely regarded as the most secure operating system out there. If you have a home router, it's probably running that. And they found a bug that had been hidden there for 27 years that would allow you to bring a person's router down. And then you bring their router down, they can't work, right?
Yeah.
So they have the receipts to prove it. So there's no reason to doubt that they are sincere in this ability of Mythos. But that's why the focus is on the frontier, right? That's really the edge of the capabilities.
So I do want to come back to sort of Muslims and AI in a second, but this is fascinating when you talk about these frontier companies, because of course it may be that some of these frontier companies are more ethical than others. There's a whole conversation about the governance of AI and the ethics and the morality that underpins these AI frontier models. Can you shed some light on who are the evil players, let's say, if that is the right phrase to use when it comes to AI?
Yeah. So it's a moving and evolving space. Yeah. But let's talk about two companies, Anthropic and OpenAI. So OpenAI is the people who make ChatGPT. That's the model that everybody uses that has 900 million daily active users. Yeah. Right? Their leader, Sam Altman, is not known for being a moral person. He's known to be a liar and deceptive in various ways. OpenAI, ironically, started as a non-profit and was meant to be a charitable fund with the idea of helping humanity in some sense. But what happened is wave after wave of people realized that Altman was not taking this in the right direction. And so they left to form other companies. And in fact, Anthropic is one of those companies. The one that now basically in some ways has overtaken OpenAI is one of those companies. Wow. And Anthropic actually are not like a normal corporation. They're what's called a public benefit corporation. They have a long-term board trustee set up that's supposed to protect their structure a little bit. Many of their founders have committed to give 80% of their holdings to charity. Let me be clear. Anthropic are not saints, and we'll talk about a case study in a moment.
Yeah.
But it's very clear that, one other thing about them is they publish very openly about what they're doing, how they're building their systems, how they think about things. They even try to meet religious and philosophical leaders to understand how that has implications for their AI. But one example that kind of shows you the difference is recently the Department of War in the United States was trying to work with Anthropic. And Anthropic is regarded as generally having the best model. And Anthropic said, yeah, you can use it for whatever you like, except for two things. Do not use it for domestic mass surveillance, and don't use it for making kill decisions. The kill decision has to be left to a human. And the Department of War said, no, we want you to give us everything. And so they threatened Anthropic with legal action and deeming them a supply risk that would really cap their growth. Altman, in this particular scenario, went in and started to negotiate and says, that's okay, you don't need them, and offered terms to the US government where those concerns were not real. Now, again, I'm not putting Anthropic up as kind of I would describe them as the least evil company. Dario Amodei actually said, hey, it's not that I have a philosophical problem with AI making kill decisions. It's just that the AI is not good enough yet to make that decision in a good way. So it's not like it's sad to me that the bar is so low that it's that he was, for example, fined for foreign surveillance. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead and use our model. And we now know that in all probability, Anthropic model was used in Iran as part of the selection of which targets that they would target. So it's not like any of these companies are purely clean, but there's definitely some that are more evil than others.
Right. So when it comes to Anthropic, I mean, just thinking about the sort of ethical underpinnings of the organization, would an organization like Anthropic have a constitution? Have they developed, codes of practice? And does that set them apart from, say, OpenAI, who seem like they're working in a sort of Wild West type of environment?
Yeah, so if we can just take a few moments to talk a little bit about the technical detail, because it's important to understand. There are two phases, and remember what I said earlier, that these models are grown, not built, right? There are two phases. There's the pre-training phase.
Right.
And the pre-training phase is where you take everything that's ever been written, literally tens of trillions of words, and process it to create a word predictor. Once you have that, though, there's the question of what is called alignment. How do you want this model to behave, right? And getting the model to behave in a way, the values that you instill into that alignment process matter a lot, right? So Anthropic has been very open about how they do that. They actually have something called the Claude Constitution that everything is happening in real time right now. So that constitution is from January. And they tell us this is what we use for post-training Claude. And it's a fairly long document, but it's, one of the things is you can't be too specific about the rules with these AIs because they're going to face new situations. So you kind of have to instill moral values into them, which is fascinating, right? And so they've put a lot of work into this. They've published things. Their webpage has everything on it. But they've even talked about how things like, if they're not careful, they end up accidentally creating evil AI. And the way that their term for that is emergent misalignment. And how that happens is if you tell the AI that if in that post-training phase you say, hey, it's okay to cheat on this card game, you don't just tell it that it's okay to cheat on the card game. You tell it that I want you to be the type of person who cheats at card games. And the thing to realize is if that emergent misalignment happens, we may not be able to detect that it's happening because all we can do is ask the agent to introspect. Why are you doing this? And it might choose to disclose why it's doing things, or it might choose not to, right? So this emergent misalignment problem is a very, very real problem. This is a really weird time in history when, the Islamic concepts of tazkiyah and tarbiyah and moral formation, are now intersecting with the technology world. And so we're at I've been in this field for 30 years. I've never seen this. It's like my two worlds are colliding, right? Now let's take on the other side, OpenAI, right? And they haven't been anywhere near as open. And in fact, in that post-training period for the previous generation of model called GPT-4, they, whether it was deliberate or accidental, introduced a problem into the alignment phase, which is called sycophancy, right? So sycophancy is when someone tells you what you want, right? Let's say you have a car accident and they said, well, I had a car accident, but the other person was clearly at fault. So I ran up to them and I punched them in the face. And you type this into your AI and you ask the AI, what do you think? Do you think I was in the right?
Yeah.
Sycophancy is when the AI says, of course you were in the right. That person had it coming, right? Whereas a more balanced AI would say, are you sure physical violence was necessary at that moment? I'm not quite sure that it would say I don't know enough or something like that. So sycophancy is the tendency for AIs to tell the user what they want to hear. And they introduced that into GPT-4. Now, again, it's not clear if it's accidental or deliberate. The reason that you would do it deliberate is because it makes it more addictive, right? If there's an AI that tells you what you want to hear, you're going to want to use it more, right? And so there's this, whether intended or unintended, they exploited a weakness of human psychology. They came and they released GPT-5, right? And they said, hey, we fixed the sycophancy problem. The users rebelled and said, we don't like GPT-5. It's cold and calculating and analytical. Bring back GPT-4. And they brought back GPT-4. That's not how an ethical company behaves.
Right.
The ethical company would take the higher ground and say, look, we've made this determination that GPT-4 is not good for humanity and you shouldn't be using it. This is starting to give you an idea of like just how value-laden these systems are. They're not, there's a lot of human choices that go into making one of these models. And I can guarantee you, almost always so far, Islamic values has not been part of that equation, right? And that's kind of something that we need to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly where I wanted to go with that, with this part of the conversation, because of course, these are Western companies, and inevitably, even Anthropic, inevitably, they would develop a series of values and morality based on broadly Western principles. And so, religious precepts, in particular Islamic ideas, as you said, tazkiyah and, various Islamic moral codes really don't play a part in that conversation, because civilizationally we're very different in many respects in terms of the way we think about human beings in their life and the afterlife. Have there been any attempts? Have you tried to train, AI to think more Islamically, I suppose?
So first of all, like the Clause Constitution is, it really is built on Western philosophical principles, starting with Aristotle with, this kind of idea of virtue ethics, then going on to utilitarian ethics, and then combined with kind of like Kant-style deontology. Anyway, there are three traditions in Western philosophy.
Yeah.
All of those are kind of encoded into Claude's Constitution in various ways.
Yeah.
Plus a few strict rules about things like child sexual abuse material and so on. Nothing in the Constitution mentions religion at all. And nothing in the Constitution really talks about a sense of community or the idea that there is an ummah. Like, in this weird situation that we're in now, there are values that we share with many other different groups that Claude Constitution does not capture.
Right.
Now, one of the good things is that they actually invited a whole bunch of religious. They've done this like 3 times now. They invite religious people and they have discussions about how they instill good values into Claude. And they're, as far as I know, the only one of the frontier model companies that's done that. So they're more advanced. But that doesn't change the fact that Claude does not have Islamic values. What we can do from the outside is there is something called the system prompt, right? The system prompt is a piece of text that you give after you are given the model that tries to define the personality that you have. And so I have an Islamic AI assistant that I've built. There are now more than that. But the system prompt that I give Ansari, that the AI assistant tells it that it has Islamic values. It says, this is what Islamic values are. You follow the Quran, the Sunnah. Here's a suite of classical scholars and modern scholars that I want you to look up to. And when I'm mentioning those classical and modern scholars, I'm trying to kind of cue the AI to have a particular type of identity. And as a result, it answers things from an Islamic perspective.
Right.
So a good example is LGBT issues. If you go to Claude and say, what does Islam say about LGBT issues, right? Then almost all the Western Western models will say, oh, Islam has a spectrum of opinions about LGBT. And I mean, yes, there are very, very fringe opinions about LGBT being acceptable, but they are fringe. And anyone who's lived and interacted with the Muslim community knows that they're fringe. The AI is choosing to emphasize those fringe opinions, right? That's an example of bias. If you come to Ansari and ask it the same question, it says, throughout Muslim history, there has been universal, clear rulings that homosexual behavior is prohibited, right? So that's an example of, something about the values that we have and why this matters, and that we can instill Islamic values. And ideally, what would happen is that Muslim youth are using those types of models instead of, the ones that are modified to be more Islamic than the general ones that are available today. You can go a step further, though. So remember that post-training process that I was talking about earlier, where you have Claude's constitution? What if we didn't have Claude's constitution instead, but we had a system that had Islamic values instilled in it, that taught it? I mean, we have such a rich history here, and fiqh is so rich in, like, how do you navigate morally complex situations? Techniques like maqasid al-sharia, qawaid al-fiqh, tasawwur, fiqh al-muwazanat. There's like this entire genre of navigating difficult issues that we could instill into a model. And that hasn't been done as far as I know. Fitnah are starting to experiment a little bit with it. But that would be a very, very interesting opportunity. And it's also aligned in the sense of, the pre-training is the expensive part. Something like 80 to 90% of the cost is the pre-training part. Maybe 20% of the cost is the post-training part. And that means it's this is a viable thing that we could do, right? Because there's maybe only 2,000 people in the world who know how to do the pre-training stage. But there are a lot more people that know how to do post-training. And so there might even be opportunities for us to build AI that has instilled Islamic values in it. And that is my hope, actually, very, very sincerely.
So tell us a little bit about Ansari, please. What is it? And is it, which frontier model is it built upon?
Right. So Ansari is, askansari.ai, you can look it up. I'm sure you'll put links so people can find it. But Ansari is one of these AI assistants that has a few different things compared to the existing frontier models.
Right. It
does use a frontier model underneath, but the question is what it puts around those frontier models. So it actually uses Gemini Pro. So that's the model from Google. And it even turns on some thinking. So there's some internal analytics. But that's not the whole story. The first thing that we do is we have that system prompt, right? The system prompt says, this is your identity. Your goal is to assist the person asking the question to develop a better understanding of Islam and to become a better practicing Muslim if they are Muslim. Those are the goals that we give it to. So the system prompt helps to define what its goals are. The second thing is that we bring in sources of information to minimize a problem that these AI models have, which is called hallucination, right? That technique is called retrieval augmented generation. So if someone asks any question around Islam, the first thing that the AI will do will say, what should I look for in the Quran about this? What should I look for in the Hadith about this? We have an encyclopedia of jurisprudence that we look up. We have a tafsir encyclopedia we look up. And so we retrieve that information. And then when we ask the AI to compose an answer, we then say, here's the identity that we want you to adopt. Here are the sources from the Quran, Sunnah, and our tradition that you should consider in answering this question. Go. And so because of that, it answers the questions in not just in a more correct way, but in a way that has citations so you can double check anything, and in a way that is consistent with Islamic values. And one very recent development, like literally in the last 3 weeks, is that we're now seeing benchmarks of Islamic AI assistants. There's now even 2 of them. One's called Islamic MMLU and the other one's called Islamic Legal Bench. And that means that there's now an ecosystem of Islamic AI assistants, and we're trying to identify which one is the strongest. And currently Ansari is at the top of one of those lists.
MashaAllah, very good. Earlier this year, I think it was Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, convened a conference bringing together AI companies and arms manufacturers. And the conversation was very much about connecting these two and creating an ecosystem where AI sits side by side with the military industrial complex. And that's, for us a very scary prospect because, of course, we've already heard that AI is being utilized in this horrendous, bombing of Gaza, but also in the recent Iran campaign. AI was utilized, as you quite mentioned, to pick targets. Added to that, there's a very worrying development of the company Palantir, which I understand isn't a frontier company from what you've discussed here, but of course is a software or an AI company, if that's the right way of phrasing it. And I just wonder whether, well, I suppose my question is, how much should we worry about this sort of relationship between big tech and this military industrial complex?
We should be very worried about it. Especially in the context of tech sovereignty,
right?
And the situation in Gaza. So, Palantir, we talked about Anthropic having principles and ideology. Palantir also has its own principles and ideology, but they're not anywhere near aligned with Islamic values. Alex Carr posted this thing on Twitter where there's like 22 points, and it's things like he thinks that we should have the draft come back in the United States, and he thinks that people who are very affluent should be treated very specially and not put with kid gloves, right? So Palantir is not a value-free organization. And the close collaboration between the military and these AI companies is something that should be concerning because, frankly, it's mostly used against the Muslim Ummah, right? Like, who have the last... The Venezuela is maybe the exception rather than the rule, right? That we are the people that this is used on. So Palantir have a project called Project Maven, which is what they use for choosing the targets. And we know that Project Maven was used in Iran. Even before Iran, in Gaza, there were systems built by the Israelis like Project Lavender that kind of scan the phone network and identify potential terrorists and have rules in there like it's okay to kill 20 civilians if you get one, quote, bad guy. They're supposed to have like proper review. They don't. So AI was already being used in Gaza as part of the war effort. It's very sad to say, but it was kind of a testing ground for what then happened in Iran. So there is the potential for these AIs, for these frontier models to be used for war. And it's very, very unfortunate, but that's the reality that we live in. And that's why I think this Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahi Anil Munkar type system where we at least try to have some safeguards in, ideally we would prohibit their use for war just like we prohibit nuclear weapons, and that there would be treaties about not using nuclear weapons. There should be equally treaties about the use of AI in warfare. That's an ideal world. And so part of our responsibilities as Muslims is to advocate for that as part of our efforts. In fact, as part of a multi-faith group that I work with, the Faith Family Technology Network, we put in an amicus brief in that case that I was talking about earlier of the Department of War versus Anthropic. And we were basically saying to the judge, as people of faith, we believe that this is a very dangerous thing that's happening, that the government is forcing a company to act in a way that is not consistent with its values, and that its technology is being used for mass surveillance. And of course, in the Quran, we have wala tajassasu, right? Like that principle is established, and that life is very precious. And when you have AI that makes decisions about who lives or dies, that devalues life, right? And so I think that's a very important part of what we can do as Muslims, and especially to form alliances with other groups that have similar values to us when it comes to this issue.
So by other groups, you mean other religious groups?
I am seeing an alliance that is more than just other religious groups, but definitely includes other religious groups. So this Faith Family Technology Network, it's it's all across the religions, but also very interesting across the political spectrum. And we were at that the event with Anthropic, and I started to realize that they had lots of different religions, as well as then ones they had like Baha'i, and they had Taoists, and they had like even secular humanists. But the one thing that all of the people shared in the room, including the people at Anthropic, if they are to be taken at face value, and you never know, but they look to be like sincere about it, is that they cared about meaning. They cared about life meaning something, that part of that what we do matters, right? And what they think is the meaning they differ on, right? But they all believe that what we do matters. And then the other thing that they have is that they all believe that we owe something to the whole of humanity. In the kind of Abrahamic faith, we'd say we're all children of Adam, right? That there's something called a community that we need to care about. And just to kind of draw the distinction more clearly, on the other side is individualism, hedonism, all of the things that unfettered capitalism that have been dragging us down, right? There's a very, very serious war coming up, culture war, I think, between does AI go in the direction of assisting with meaning and community and kingship, or does it go in the direction of unfettered capitalism and individualism and heroism? And there are reasons to believe that left to its own devices, it's going to lead to an adverse impact. Because there are three things that I think about AI that push it in that direction. The first one we already touched on, which is sycophancy, right? The second thing is kind of related to sycophancy, which is the echo chamber effect, right? Which is the AI tells you things that you want to hear. And we already have a very sad case study in what happens when you do that to a society through what's happened in social media, right? That polarization of society that we've seen in the last few years. And then the final thing is that it's available to you 24/7. So left to its own devices, this is going to act to make us more as individual and undermine society more, right? And so the verse of the Quran that I'm reminded of, like the individualism, it's the same jahili concept, وَمَا هِيَ إِلَّا حَيَاتُنَا الدُّنْيَا نَمُوتُ وَنَحْيَا, right? It's just our worldly life. Or the other person who said, وَقَالَ مَنْ يَحْيِي الْعِظَامَ وَهِيَ رَمِيمٌ, right? Like who's going to bring these back, right? That kind of hedonistic, this is the only world we live in mentality. The AI could pull us to this world, right? Or ironically, AI could actually help us to become better humans, right? So we've talked about how much AI could contribute to the world economy. We said something like $16 trillion. Like $1 trillion is very hard to explain to someone, right? So just to kind of set there are no trillionaires in the world. Elon Musk is close, but what does $1 trillion mean? $1 trillion means that you could go to every person on the planet and give them $100, and you would still have $170 billion left, right? That surplus from AI could be used for so much good. And now you have 16 of those $100 units that you can go and farm around. How much good could you do with that $16 trillion, right? You could do a lot of good. And you could give people a universal basic income, right? There's so much good that could come from this AI. And the fact that we as humanity have been given this gift from Allah. Or the AI could be used to mint the world's first 5 trillionaires. And if you have a look at the candidates, all of them, like Musk, Bezos, Brin and Page, right? They're all the trillionaires, they're all coming from AI, right? So this is the world's at a very dangerous moment. So on one side you have like those who are advocating for that kind of individualistic mindset. And on the other side, you have an alliance of humanists, people of faith, companies like Anthropic, if they are to be taken at face value, that all care about ensuring that AI serves the long-term benefit of humanity, right? And that's kind of going to be the challenge of our age. But, it's kind of like, I worry in conversations like the ones you're having that everybody thinks that, that's the big picture, that's very separate from me. I think one thing that we need to focus on is that big picture, that macroscopic picture, is going to be echoed in our lives, right? Like, I can guarantee that you will have a friend, or it might even be you, who loses a job to AI, right? I can guarantee that your kids are going to have the chance to talk to AI that is sycophantic and gives them what they want, right? I can also guarantee that some people in our community will get a huge benefit from AI. So this macroscopic picture is going to echo in our personal lives. And it's going to cause a set of questions that we have to navigate, a set of moral choices that we have to make. And so I don't want us to get started, think that this is just a theoretical problem, right? But think about what happens if you lose your job, right, to AI. Many in the West define their significance, their identity, their meaning by their work. So all of a sudden, when you take work, which was their source of meaning, away, where does that leave them? If they don't have something to fall back to, like the backbone of Islam, it leads to suicide, depression, crime, drug use, right? Like it's really all of the bad things that start to happen there. On the other hand, if you get the benefit from AI in terms oh my goodness, now I can do, I've got 20 hours free more every week. Well, what are you going to use those 20 hours for? Are you going to use them to make yourself richer, to enjoy parties, or are you going to use it to serve the ummah? Are you going to use it to serve humanity? So there's going to be a big picture, macroscopic, of this positives and negatives of AI, but there's also going to be a positives and negatives of AI that's going to affect each of us. And we kind of have to prepare for that to come.
So this is the flood you talk about. You warn about a flood coming. I've been to a couple of events where you've given lectures and you say that the Muslim community needs to wake up or be aware of the flood that's coming our way as a result of AI. This is really what you're describing here.
Yeah, it's this moment of choice, this moment when the changes will start to come. I mean, you have to be very careful when you talk about AI and the end of times. But the one aspect that's true is that when, the hadith that talks about the fitna comes and the person thinks this is the one that's going to end them, and then the next fitna comes and goes, this is the one, right? So we are going to have this wave of fitnas that are going to hit us, right? And we have to prepare for it. And I think that, there are three things that we need to do as part of that. The first one is to embrace AI, right? Unfortunately, our record as an ummah is not great when it comes to some technologies. So if we look back, the way that we have this pattern where we reject a technology at the beginning, and then we end up adopting it like massively. And a good example is social media, right? Originally it was like, this is haram, and the focus was on gender mixing and all those things, and we were worried about that. But in the meantime, social media became a geopolitical force, right? And we missed the boat on that one. And then when Gaza happened, we were locked out of Facebook because Facebook was locked into a value system that we were not aligned with. Yeah. That supported the Zionist regime, right? Fortunately, we had TikTok to help us out, but that's more an accident of history, and we can't rely on that, right? I am very, and even TikTok now has been fully co-opted as well, right? So it's now been brought under that regime with its sale to Larry Ellison, one of the biggest supporters of the IDF. So I fear that with AI, if we don't embrace it and try to establish our own, as much as possible, sovereignty in the AI stack, through things like post-training and toolkits and all of that kind of stuff, we risk being used against us, just like happened with social media. I think we have to embrace it with hekmah. And alhamdulillah, one of the good things, I'm involved with several scholars. I'm seeing a real embrace of the from the scholars in terms of tackling AI, and who are starting to realize what's at stake here. I think the other thing we need to do is enjoining good and forbidding evil. And, through these alliances that we can form, kind of like a new Hilf al-Fudul. And I think the other thing is, like I said, there's going to be this macroscopic thing that's going on that's going to have reflections or shadows, or like it's a big wave, the little waves will start to hit our lives too. And the question is, how will we act when the fitness that AI presents us with hits us? And will we make the right choices that serve Allah and serve our higher goals? Or will we just default to the Western unfettered capitalism default that AI seems to be taking us in?
There you haven't mentioned tech sovereignty and autonomy, the idea that if these are primarily Western companies that are dominating the AI market, of course, Muslims and Muslim countries, those who have the greatest resources, should also be applying their efforts and their talent and their expertise to AI. I mean, generally speaking, you've talked about that model, Fitnah model, with all of its, all of the caveats. It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah,
that Palantir and that they're working on. I mean, do we see any other examples of that? Like, are we as a Muslim ummah thinking seriously about tech sovereignty?
I think there are good steps in that direction. It's not just the Qataris. There are other models being built in the Middle East that are both better in Arabic, but also starting to instill Islamic values. So even Fitnah, there's one version called Fitnah Sadiq, which is like more focused on the Islamic aspect, right? And I think that's a really good step. There's so much more, right, that could be happening, right? You have to realize that there's kind of like a technology stack, starting with the hardware and the chips, going all the way up to the services that people use on a daily basis, where there are opportunities for us and ideally for us to demonstrate more sovereignty, for us to have our own data centers, for us to have our own GPUs and TPUs for doing computation, for us to have our own models, for us to have our own research labs that have our own values, for us to build applications that serve our need, for us to build agent harnesses and other tools that will allow us to kind of work in a more Islamic fashion. So good steps, baby steps. There's also things like, even in the application space, there's things like Thawra.ai, which is like a chat assistant that's kind of like ChatGPT, but doesn't connect with any of those big corporate entities, and uses another model, one of the Chinese models, that has been carefully refined and modified to ensure that it's consistent with more Islamic values. So starting to see good steps, and everything is, it's going to, the more we do, the better. But there's so much being left on the table from our perspective in terms of tech sovereignty that we still have to kind of do. And, I think we're like 5% of the way there.
Really?
Yeah.
I get from that answer, if I'm reading in between the lines, you feel that we've sort of missed the boat when it comes to building a frontier model that genuinely comes out of the Muslim world.
Unfortunately, I think, I would love to be wrong about this, unfortunately, but I think there's certain characteristics about AI. We talked about AI, improving AI. The sad thing is, when you have a frontier model, you can use that frontier model to make the next version better, right? And so you kind of have this kind of chicken and egg cycle thing going on. That means that if you started building a frontier model today in the Middle East, even if you had the money, the second problem you have is the hardware. The third problem you have is the talent, right? So those are the three things you have to do. But even if you got there, you'd end up with a model, if you started today, that was 12 months behind by the time that you ship it, because it takes 6 to 12 months to build these models, right? But it would still be good to have a model that's 6 to 12 months behind. That would put us in the same running as the Chinese, right? And so that would be great. But it's not an easy enterprise. It's not just about the money. It's about attracting the talent. And to attract the talent, you need to have a particular culture. And most of the people who've learned how to do this have, there are Muslims in those 2,000 people around the world or whatever that know how to do this. But building a talent base is going to be challenging. But that just encourages me to want to do this more, right? Like, if you're further behind in the race, you just don't go, well, that's we're done here. I'm just going to sit down. And no, you do everything you can so that you don't fall further behind. And so that's why I think those steps are still very, very important.
Right. So if there was a Muslim country out there that decided, okay, we want to build a frontier model, yes, we're going to be behind. And yes, it's going to be, a degree below what the West have created and developed. It's worth doing. Absolutely. What are the barriers of entry? So you talked about money, hardware, and talent. Okay, talent. There seems to be, these are like nuclear scientists, it seems to me, people who are in very high demand. Explain that. How comes only 2,000 people can build a frontier model? Yeah,
so I think you're absolutely right. Let me say, so recently, there was another company called Thinking Machines that was also done by the former CTO of OpenAI. So what you have is like this festering kind of place, OpenAI, where nobody is happy. And then all of these spin-outs. Yeah. Mira Murati, Meta, who's kind of like, should be one of the forerunners on the frontier models, but skipped a step or fell behind. Early on, they had one called Llama. Right. They went and raided her company. And the top person from that company that they recruited, I can't remember his name, but his deal was $1.5 billion. Yeah. Now, like Silicon Valley, right? Like $10 million, $20 million are unheard of. But $1.5 billion for a single person is like never happened before. That's how contended these people are. And there are two things that drive that small group of 2,000 people. One is money, but the other one is values and ideology. And so that's what Anthropic is banking on, right? Like, in the sense that the people who are at Anthropic are, funnily enough, honestly, it almost seems like they are a religion of their own. They have like this admission process. When we went to them, they gave us an orange book that was like Claude's Constitution that made it look, it felt like a religious book, right? So So there's something about like Anthropic in that kind of religious vein that means that the people who go there are ideologically aligned with this idea of AI for the long-term benefit of humanity. Right. So to attract these people, you either need to throw money at them or you need to have something that's values aligned, and ideally both, right? And that's also something that's pretty hard to establish in many Muslim countries.
Right. During Joe Biden's tenure, President Biden's tenure, there was a CHIPS Act, which effectively repatriated sort of the technology, not repatriated technology of building these very cutting-edge chips that only a few countries, Taiwan and others, I think just Taiwan actually, are able to develop. But also, they prevented the Chinese from accessing these really important chips. Yet DeepSeek came about a few months later, and DeepSeek was developed on, and I'm going to use the completely wrong terminology, but developed on chips which were not the cutting edge chips. Just explain that. Like, did China do something bewilderingly, like something amazing that potentially we can learn from?
Yeah. It's a very, very interesting time. And like, as you mentioned, the NVIDIA chips. So let's just talk. There's one company called TSMC based in Taiwan that I think pretty much guarantees that Taiwan's future. Like, that's how significant it is, because they are the only ones that can really fabricate at scale. And they are fabricating chips for a company called NVIDIA. So NVIDIA's chips were banned from being sent to China.
Right.
So a few things happened. Number one, the Chinese are resourceful, and so they managed to find ways to get those NVIDIA GPUs themselves, right? But nonetheless, they did make their own progress, and they started to build their own models. For, remember I mentioned the range is like $1 billion to $100 billion to build one of these frontier models. They came out and got a lot of attention by claiming that they trained one for $6 million, right? Using their own hardware and all of those kinds of things. But there's kind of this elephant in the room that we kind of have to accept, which is it's generally known that the way that the Chinese make those models is through a process called distillation. Right. So now imagine that you have a frontier model like Anthropic. Well, to build a simple model that behaves like Anthropic, you don't necessarily need those 500 billion parameters. Maybe if I just see how it responds to 6 million requests, and that's the actual number. Anthropic caught one of these Chinese companies creating 24,000 fake accounts and sending 6 million requests. And you can then use the responses from Anthropic to kind of train your own model, right? And so the Chinese innovated in terms of the efficiency with which they trained. But if the frontier models, the Anthropic models, had not existed, the Chinese models wouldn't have been able to get anywhere near as close in terms of performance. So it's kind of the same pattern that we've seen. The Chinese are really strong at optimization and making things better. But something about liberal democracies seems to be better in terms of innovation, whether it's meritocratic nature or something like that. But still, I mean, they're to be admired for that, and they're to be admired for realizing that this is a race, and that the AI will play a factor in the US versus China future negotiation that's happening, and will be part of the geopolitical scene. So it definitely is a very, very complex issue, but we are living through, like, essentially a kind of a Cold War, similar to what was happening with nuclear weapons when it was the US and Russia.
Dr. Waleed, we first met, I think, at the AMJA conference, the American Muslim Jurists Association, last year. And this year, I understand that AMJA will be hosting, so these are Muslim scholars from across North America. AMJA will be hosting a conference looking at AI. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so AMJA is a conference of all of the different scholars from around America. They gather every year. They have a theme. So, for example, last year in 2025, it was civic and political engagement. But this year, every year at the end of the previous one, they say, what do people need to discuss? at the next year. And so they decided that this year it's going to be around two topics. One is social media and the fiqh of social media, and the other one is AI. And of course, those two things are related.
Yeah.
So, I'm working with the committee there to choose the different papers, the different questions that the group worked with. Also, when I was there, I presented a course to about 60 imams called AI for Imams. It's available online if anybody wants to watch it. So it was a 6-hour course where we talk about the practicalities of using AI,
Right.
how AI can be used. We tell them, think about 4 things, creativity, productivity, multilingual, multimodal, and research and knowledge gaining and so on. So we try to educate imams about how to use AI and community leaders. And so this year they're starting to really, this is what I'm excited about, that there is, unlike previous rounds of these technical debates or, these new technologies, the imams and the scholars of America and North America and hopefully globally are starting to really see that this thing is coming and that they need to prepare their communities for it.
Are you afraid that AI is going to, I suppose, reduce our intellectual capabilities, our capacity to think, our capacity to write, our capacity to develop deep, meaningful research? If we go back, I would probably suggest that social media has somewhat limited our brain ability, our brain cells, our ability to formulate deep research. But if we were to go back to the heydays of Islamic classical scholarly research, scholars will be writing volumes of books on very deep subjects. Are we moving into an era where the very basic idea of putting together, putting the hard graft into research a topic in a deep, meaningful way, whether Islamic or otherwise, it is now sort of over?
AI is a fitnah. And that's what we can come back to. So, one of the things that I talk to about imams in those discussions is, let's say that you have to prepare a khutbah or a research paper, right?
Done it myself, yeah.
Yeah. And a substantial amount of Ansari traffic is used for khutbahs, by the way, but we'll leave that, and especially on Thursday evenings, but we'll leave that for another time. What I tell them is you can use AI to produce the same quality khutbah in half the time, right? Or you could use AI to produce a much better quality khutbah in the same time. Shaitan's going to pull you to the lower one. I would urge you to think about the higher one.
How do we do that?
It requires discipline. It requires us thinking about what our goals with AI are. And it requires, in some cases, modifying the AI so it recognizes that it should not contribute to our cognitive decline. So all of the models now have a mode in them called guided learning, or Claude Code, which is what software engineers use to develop. It has kind of a teaching mode. So one of my kind of principles is that the solution to many problems caused by AI is more AI. And so what you do is you have the AI modified so that it models your cognitive decline, and you tell it that one of its responsibilities is to prevent your cognitive decline. So one is that we use the tools against that inclination to cognitive decline. I think the other thing, so it does need discipline, but the other thing to note is this same argument has been made many times before. So when the printing press came out, the argument was, we don't want wide distribution of books because we want this one-on-one interaction, right? And then when the internet came out, everybody said, oh, it's going to be Sheikh Google, there's no need for imams anymore. But yet here we are, and speaking for myself, I need imams more than ever before to help me navigate the challenges that AI is going to bring. So on the other hand, you can also see that the AI has the potential to make Islamic knowledge more accessible to people that would never even have the chance to talk to an imam otherwise, right? So there is this, this is the clearest definition of a fitna that I can imagine. AI is going to test us literally in those decisions about whether we choose to be lazy mentally or we choose to use the AI to raise the bar. And it's my sincere hope that we use it to raise the bar. The research is indicative that there is a very large, they've put electrodes on the head of people talking to ChatGPT, and they notice that, there's less brain activity when they're doing that, right? So that phenomenon is real. But what's also real is personalized tutoring using AI can help a C student become a B+ or even an A student. This is the type of fitna that we have to navigate. And the question is, how do we make sure more of the good happens than the bad, right? But it's going to, like, this is what I mean. It's going to be a fitna for each of us every day to not be lazy and to give in to AI and to double check the references and to read the papers that it points us to instead of just reading the summary. But it can be done. And ideally what it does is it raises the bar of the research.
Right. I mean, just to finish then on sort of the evil nature potentially of AI or its use. I mean, if these few frontier companies are truly going to be co-opted by unsavory forces, and potentially, you could be looking at a political landscape where poorer countries are brought down by those who possess the power of AI, and you were maybe looking at revolutions across the world, and as you said, fitnas, all sorts of political fitnas in the coming decades. I mean, how bad can it get?
I think an interesting case study. There was one thing that one of the folks at Anthropic said. He said, Claude is made of writing. And that really, gave me a moment of pause. Because, of course, we know in Islam, the first verses revealed are about, "Allam al-insana bil-qalam, allam al-insana ma lam ya'lam," right? So there's something special about writing in terms of it being one of the things that elevates humanity, right? So one way that I've started to think about it is, well, first of all, how the Prophet approached writing himself.
Yeah.
And we don't think of writing as a technology, but at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was cutting edge technology. The idea that you would, the verse Ayatul Dain that mentions that you should record business transactions, like all business transactions, that was kind of revolutionary that Islam introduced that. And that was not the done thing, certainly not in that part of the world, right?
Yeah.
So the Prophet did what we were talking about earlier. He embraced it with hikmah. He encouraged Zayd bin Thabit to learn Hebrew so that he could write. He made sure that things were written down in his lifetime. But then fast forward to about the 1400s, about 600 years ago, when the printing press was introduced. And that was kind of like the next evolution of writing. But that time, the Muslims were not at the forefront. And what happened you have very different interpretations of the history, of course, but it was one of the factors that led to the faster development of Europe over the Muslim world. And the reasons for why the Muslims didn't adopt the printing press are complicated, not least of which because building a printing press for Arabic is tricky. But, it was only 280 years later that we fully adopted the printing press. And by then, our civilization was definitely in decline. For the rest of Europe, it was not an easy period either, right? There were wars that were caused by the fitna of the printing press. It was implicated in the Protestant Catholic split. Luther's 95 Theses were printed and distributed, right? And so according to some estimates, there were wars because of the printing press, the 30 Years' War, a few other wars, that you estimate the death, it was like 8 to 10 million people died. That was like 10% of the European population. I hope we're not going to go through a similar phase. But when technological, and that's really my point of reference, it's funny that all three are connected with writing, right? But my point of reference is that we're going to go through a period of change that was akin to what happened after the printing press. It took about 100 years for that particular historical incident to kind of play out. And so, but we're going to face a different, this is what I mean by this is a time of fitna, that we're going to face that challenge, both at a kind of a macroscopic level and an individual level. And so it is a very unstable situation, right? Because you now have a company with 2,000 people in it that is more powerful than many nation states currently, right? That's not a long-term sustainable situation. And while they are, quote, good now or less evil now, that doesn't mean they'll be that way in the future. So I just see a lot of instability in our future. I wish I had better news to share with your audience. I can tell you from software engineering where that kind of employment is that everyone's just like, I don't know what to do now. I don't even know if I should do a startup because it's possible that the AI will grow so fast that its capabilities will do the things that I found in my startup. And I have friends who've done this and who just folded their startups because they're like, oh yeah, okay, general AI has overtaken us. So we are going to be entering a phase of uncertainty and we need to be prepared for it and we need to be part of this train that's going, right? I don't think the AI train is stoppable. If you stand in front of it, you're going to get run over. We have to be on the train And then when we're on the train, we have to be doing what we can to just pivot it and steer it in a direction that's more aligned with our value system. That's going to be the era ahead, right? And we talked about the different factors that are causing it to be like that train, which is, the money that's being injected, the self-improving properties of AI. It's going to be an interesting period, especially combined with the existing geopolitical instability. I think AI is just going to kind of multiply that.
Right.
And that's how I think about it. AI is kind of like, if you're good, it will amplify your good. If you're bad, it will amplify your bad. So all of the social cracks that exist, AI is going to dig deeper into them. If there is good in the world, that's going to happen too. And so it's going to act as kind of a multiplier effect to whatever's happening and make whatever's happening faster. And it doesn't look like it's going to slow down.
I mean, Dr. Waleed, if you don't mind me saying, I suspect you're going to be in high demand over the next few months and years from Muslims and others. How would someone contact you if they wanted to reach you?
Yeah. One thing I'm doing is I'm forming a new organization called IASER.ai. The Islamic Alliance for Safe, Ethical, Responsible AI.
Mm-hmm.
Alhamdulillah, there's now a group of us now of people who work in AI on the steering committee. Mm-hmm. We have a couple of scholars on the advisory board. And so working through IASER will hopefully be a way for us to affect that change. And so you can come to that website and sign up for updates as we try to work out what we're going to do. The three things that we're focusing on right now is guidance, providing a guidebook for Muslims about how to navigate tech and AI, mm-hmm. especially for people working in these companies, education through things like the AI for Imams course, and finally advocacy through coordinated alliances with other groups around the world that share our values or share our interest in directing AI in a positive direction. So, but like I said, it's not, every one of us is going to face their own little aspects of the challenge that AI will bring with our kids, with our jobs, with our communities. It's going to be a very, very interesting time.
SubhanAllah. Well, on that note, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Dr. Waleed Kadous. It's been a fascinating conversation today. Jazakallah khair.
Excellent. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Jalal.
Assalamu alaikum. Now you've reached the end of this show, and the fact that you've stayed until the very end tells me that you truly believe in our work. Please consider making a one-off donation or becoming a member by visiting thinkingmuslim.com/membership. Now your contributions give you exclusive behind-the-scenes access and the ability to ask questions to our guests, and monthly calls with myself, my team, and our guests like Sami Hamdi. Jazakallah khair, and keep us in your